RUSI New South Wales is an independent, apolitical, not-for-profit public education institute that, since 1888, has been promoting informed debate on and enhancing public awareness and understanding of defence and national security issues. We are Australia's oldest think tank. We conduct monthly lectures and seminars, issue a monthly newsletter, provide research support through our extensive military and historical library located in the Anzac Memorial in Sydney's Hyde Park, and together with RUSI Australia, publish a national quarterly magazine called United Service, with informed articles addressing the latest defence and security issues.
Please note, this monthly update presents the geostrategic situation, as at the 10th of January, 2025. As often with these rapidly changing events, the monthly update can be out of date by the time the newsletter or podcast is issued. As much as we might have hoped that our geostrategic hotspots might have calmed down a little over the Christmas period, I regret to report that there has been no such luck. I will attempt to succinctly summarize the more significant issues that have attracted my attention. United States. President-elect Donald J. Trump's 2024 presidential election victory was certified by a joint sitting of the U.S. Congress on the 6th of January, 2025, and he will be inaugurated in Washington, D.C., on the 20th of January. On several occasions over the past month, Trump has flagged a proposed major change in U.S. foreign policy, seemingly prepared to ditch the U.S. approach to international affairs based on a rules-based order and alliances and partnerships with like-minded nation-states. He is proposing that the U.S. goes it alone to ensure its security. To this end, he wants to expand U.S. territory to incorporate other territories vital to U.S. security. Buy Greenland from Denmark, or seize it by military force. Annex Canada using economic force to incorporate Canada into the Union, making it the 51st state. Invade Panama to retake control of the Panama Canal, and rename the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. Not surprisingly, the governments of the target territories and their allies have told Trump that he is dreaming, but that does not seem to have deterred him. He has emphasized that he is prepared to use economic coercion or military force if necessary to achieve his goals. Please note that there is no disputing the strategic value of Greenland to the United States, which first tried to purchase it from Denmark in 1868 following the purchase of Alaska from Russia in 1867. In 1951, the Truman administration again offered to buy Greenland from Denmark. In a compromise, the U.S. was given an air base at Thule, now the Pitofik Space Base, 1,200 kilometers inside the Arctic Circle. The territory's strategic location and mineral wealth are being enhanced today as climate change leads to longer periods of ice-free maritime trade routes, providing faster alternative routes from Europe to North Asia, avoiding strategic choke points such as the Suez Canal and Straits of Malacca. Russia-Ukraine war. The principal development of geostrategic import affecting the war in Ukraine over the past month has continued to be Donald J. Trump's decisive victory in the United States presidential elections on the 5th of November. With both Russia and Ukraine nearly exhausted after nigh on 3 years, 34 months, of high-end warfare, the focus of each side has been on improving its negotiating position for the peace talks which must now follow. Political developments. On several occasions during the U.S. presidential election campaign, Trump pledged to end the Russia-Ukraine war within 24 hours of him assuming office. Trump's chosen special peace envoy for Ukraine, retired Army General Keith Kellogg, conceded on the 11th of January that would not be possible. Rather, Trump would now aim to end the war within 100 days of re-entering the White House. Australia's Minister for Foreign Affairs, Senator Penny Wong, announced during a visit to Kiev on the 18th of December that Australia's ambassador to Ukraine, Paul Learman, and his staff, who have been working from Warsaw for nearly 3 years, would return to Kiev to a reopened embassy in January 2025. Senator Wong said it was a show of unity with Ukraine. On the 19th of December, Russian Lieutenant General Igor Kirillov and his assistant were assassinated in Moscow not far from the Kremlin. As they left their apartment building just before daybreak, a bomb planted on a scooter leant up against the building was detonated remotely. Ukraine's Secret Service, the SBU, claimed responsibility. On the 20th of December, among the points made by Russian President Vladimir Putin at his annual press conference in Moscow were that he was ready for negotiations to end the Ukraine war. Russia was moving towards solving its primary tasks in Ukraine. He expected that Ukraine's resolve to continue the war would run out in coming months. All parties involved in the war would need to be ready for both negotiations and compromises, and Israel had been the main beneficiary of Assad's downfall in Syria. He downplayed the effect on Russia's geostrategy. In early January, President Biden announced $6 billion in additional military and budget aid for Kiev, and the European Union announced that it had transferred €3 billion to Ukraine, the first tranche of profits from frozen Russian assets. On the 10th of January, the United States, United Kingdom, and Japan announced new sanctions against Russia. On the 10th of January, the Kremlin reiterated that it is ready to hold talks with U.S. President-elect Donald Trump without any preconditions, but noted that its negotiating position remains unchanged. Ukraine's Kursk offensive. You will recall that, on the 6th of August, Ukraine launched a successful cross-border incursion from Sumy Oblast in Ukraine's northeast into Kursk Oblast in Russia's west, catching Russia by surprise. By the time the offensive culminated in September, Ukraine claimed to have pushed 28 to 35 kilometers into Kursk Oblast on a front at least 40 kilometers wide, and to have captured some 1,263 square kilometers of Russian territory, including 93 settlements. President Volodymyr Zelensky said the Kursk operation was intended to create a buffer zone at the border to prevent further Russian attacks across the border into Sumy Oblast. The Kremlin, though, suspected that Zelensky would seek to use the Kursk salient as a bargaining chip in any negotiations, say to exchange Kursk for Crimea. To obviate this, since October, President Putin has been attempting to drive the Ukrainian forces out of Kursk Oblast. To do so, he assembled a force of 30,000 troops, including some 11,000 North Koreans. The Russian-Korean force initially managed to reduce the size of the Ukrainian salient by some 325 square kilometers in October-November, but, despite heavy fighting to reduce the salient further, have made only incremental progress since. Nevertheless, by now they have reduced the size of the salient by more than a third of its original size. In December, in an attempt to gain more leverage in any peace talks, Ukraine also launched a counteroffensive in Kursk, which is ongoing, and was reinforced on the 6th of January. So far, they have regained some lost territory, but none of it of operational significance. According to the United States, North Korean forces in Kursk are experiencing mass casualties in the heavy fighting on the front lines of the Ukrainian salient. 1,000 of their troops were killed or wounded in the last week of December alone. It is clear that Russian and North Korean military leaders are treating these troops as expendable and ordering them on hopeless assaults against Ukrainian defenses, the White House spokesman said on the 28th of December, describing the troops' offensive as massed, dismounted assaults. On the 11th of January, Ukraine confirmed that it had captured alive 2 wounded North Korean soldiers. Usually wounded Koreans are killed by their own side to avoid their capture. Russia's Donbass and Zaporizhia offensives. Russia has the upper hand in the fighting in eastern and southern Ukraine. In the industrial Donbass region, especially in Donetsk Oblast, intense fighting has continued and Russian forces have been making slow but steady territorial gains. In December, they continued their advance towards Toretsk, Kurakov, west of Donetsk city, south of Pokrovsk, and further south, in the vicinity of Vuhledar, which fell to the Russians on the 1st of October. Further north, they consolidated their positions on the eastern bank of the Oskil River. So far in January, Russian forces have advanced near Kupiansk, Chasiv Yar, Toretsk, Pokrovsk, and Kurakov. By the 10th of January, however, the key objectives on the north-south line west of Bakhmut, namely Chasiv and Toretsk, and further west, Pokrovsk and Kurakov, still remained in Ukrainian hands. Russian forces, though, were making tactical gains south of Pokrovsk as they attacked into Ukrainian weak points and attempted a turning maneuver to directly assault Pokrovsk from the south. In southern Ukraine, Russian forces continued offensive operations in western Zaporizhia Oblast north of Robotyne, where they have made slow but steady progress towards the Dnipro River and Zaporizhia city without seizing any operationally significant objectives. The BBC Russian service reported on 10 January that a joint investigation conducted with Russian opposition outlet Medizona, using open-source data, had confirmed that at least 88,055 Russian soldiers have been killed in Ukraine since February 2022. Drone and missile attacks. During recent months, Ukraine has escalated its missile and drone attacks on targets inside Russia, particularly after the 18th of November, 2024, when the US gave Ukraine permission to use US-supplied long-range missiles to strike military targets in Russian areas close to the two countries' shared border. On the 22nd of December, Ukraine launched an audacious drone attack on the Russian city of Kazan, which is located some 1,000 kilometers east of the Russo-Ukrainian border. A drone smashed into a high-rise apartment building in the city, damaging the building but leaving no victims, according to the Russian Foreign Ministry. Vladimir Putin vowed destruction in response to the attack on Kazan. He has previously threatened to target the center of Kiev with a hypersonic ballistic missile in response to Ukrainian attacks on Russian territory. Russia's military first used the missile, named Oreshnik, on the 21st of November against a target in the eastern Ukrainian city of Dnipro. At the time, Mr. Putin said the missile could deliver multiple payloads and could travel 10 times the speed of sound. On the night of 9 to 10 January, Ukrainian forces struck a Russian ammunition and drone storage warehouse in Russia's Rostov Oblast. Azerbaijani Airlines Flight J2-8243. On the 25th of December, AA Flight J2-8243 from Baku, capital of Azerbaijan, in the southern Caucasus to Grozny, capital of Chechnya, Russian Federation, in the northern Caucasus. As it approached Grozny airport suddenly diverted in an easterly direction and traveled several hundred kilometers across the Caspian Sea before crash landing near the city of Aktau in Kazakhstan. The front half of the aircraft was badly damaged and 38, including the pilot, of the 67 passengers and crew were killed. There were 29 survivors who reported that the aircraft, an Embraer 190, had made 3 attempts to land at Grozny. Early investigations by the 27th of December had established that Grozny's air defenses against Ukrainian drone attacks were operating at the time, and it is suspected that a surface-to-air missile was fired and exploded near the plane, causing damage and forcing the plane to divert to another airfield. The closest Russian airfield was closed at the time, hence the diversion to Aktau. On the 28th of December, Russian President Vladimir Putin called Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev. Putin acknowledged speculation that the Russian air defense may have accidentally shot down the plane and advised that Russian air defense was active at the time. He added that the towns of Mozdok and Vladikavkaz were being attacked by Ukrainian combat drones during this time, and Russian air defense was repelling these attacks. Putin did not claim responsibility for crash, but apologized to Mr. Aliyev that the incident took place in Russian airspace. Middle East conflicts. Yemen. On the 21st of December, a ballistic missile strike on Tel Aviv was launched from Yemen by Iran-backed Houthi rebels. Israel immediately retaliated. On the 22nd of December, a U.S. Navy F-A-18 was shot down over the Red Sea in a friendly fire incident during American air strikes against Houthi rebels. Both pilots survived after ejecting from the fighter. U.S. Central Command said that the guided missile cruiser USS Gettysburg mistakenly fired on and hit the F-A-18, which was flying off the USS Harry S. Truman aircraft carrier. The airstrikes from the carrier group targeted a missile storage facility and a command and control facility operated by the Houthis in Yemen's capital, Sana'a. On the 26th of December, Israel bombed ports, power stations and airports in Yemen, including the airport in Sana'a, the capital, killing 3 people and injuring 11 others. Israel said the strikes were in retaliation for increased missile and drone attacks from Houthi rebels on Israel in recent weeks. The director of the World Health Organization was preparing to board an aircraft at Sana'a airport when it was attacked, but he was not injured. Syria. Syria's new de facto leader is Ahmed al-Sharaa, leader of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, the militant Islamic group, which spearheaded the overthrow of the Assad regime in early December. Since the overthrow of Assad, rallies in Damascus have called for democracy, protection of women's rights, and a secular government. Sharaa announced on the 30th of December that it may take up to a year before Syrians begin to see drastic changes in their country, up to 3 years to draft a new constitution for Syria, and up to 4 years before elections can be held. Since taking national office, Sharaa has been presenting a moderate face to the world and has been attempting to reassure neighboring countries that are concerned about the new regime's militant Islamist past. His message has been that the new regime will not work on exporting the revolution. Rather, Damascus will seek to establish strategic relations with all regional states. Mass graves have been discovered in Syria on a scale not seen since the Nazis, according to former U.S. War Crimes Ambassador at large Stephen Rapp, after visiting 2 mass grave sites in the towns of Qutayfa and Najjar near Damascus. Some international speculation has focused on the possible fate of Asma al-Assad, who some say has morphed from being Syria's equivalent of Princess Diana into its Marie Antoinette. Meanwhile, Israel has taken the opportunity created by the turmoil in Syria to seize more Syrian territory. It has occupied the Golan Heights since the 1967 Six-Day War, and formally annexed the area in 1981. A 1974 agreement established a wide buffer zone along the eastern flank of the Golan separating Israeli and Syrian forces. Israel has now occupied that buffer zone and has advanced further into Syria, expanding this newly occupied zone. Israel also has bombed several hundred targets across Syria, which Israel believes have been used by Iranian-backed militia for activities inimical to Israel's interests. Gaza. The war in Gaza continues apace, despite ongoing peace talks which may approaching a successful conclusion. Palestinian groups continue to conduct asymmetric warfare in the cities, particularly in northern Gaza, while Israel is determined to destroy Hamas and other Islamic militant groups before any ceasefire comes into effect. Civilians continue to be impacted by the fighting. For example, 5 Palestinian journalists were killed on the 26th of December in an Israeli airstrike in central Gaza. The strike happened near the Al-Orda hospital in Nusayrat, with an Israeli missile hitting a television broadcast van the men were sleeping in. The IDF has dismissed assertions they were media workers, insisting the 5 men were terrorists from the Palestinian Islamic Jihad group. For almost 3 months, the IDF has laid siege to northern Gaza, targeting what it described as Hamas militants regrouping in the area. On the 27th of December, Israeli forces forcibly evacuated of the Kamal Adwan hospital in northern Gaza. The hospital director said IDF troops had set fire to operating theaters inside of the besieged hospital, but the IDF denied this. The IDF said the patients would be transferred to other hospitals in Gaza, but it was unclear which facilities had the capacity to take more people. The IDF said Hamas militants, including some which took part in the raid on Israel on the 7th of October, 2023, were operating from Kamal Adwan. Further, it emerged on the 28th of December that the IDF had arrested many of the Kamal Adwan hospital staff, including its director, Dr. Hussam Abu Safiya. The IDF said Hamas militants were operating from Kamal Adwan and those arrested were suspected militants. 15 of the Palestinians it arrested in and around the hospital were involved the 7th of October, 2023 terrorist attacks. Dr. Hussam had been taken in for questioning, as he was suspected of being a Hamas operative. The World Health Organization has revealed the hospital, which was already struggling to remain open, is no longer operational, as a result of the latest raid and the detention of key medical staff. Sudan. Sudan is a country of 50 million people, and a civil war there, which has been ongoing for 21 months, since the 15th of April, 2023, has created a humanitarian crisis on a scale exceeding those in Ukraine and Gaza. The civil war is between rival factions in the Sudanese military government, the Sudanese Armed Forces, SAF, under General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, and the Paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, RSF, under Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo, aka Hemedti. Most fighting has been concentrated around the capital, Khartoum, and in the Darfur region in the country's west. Starting in October 2023, the momentum began to swing towards the RSF, which defeated SAF forces in Darfur and made gains in Khartoum State, Kordofan in central Sudan, and El Jazeera State. Momentum, however, swung back to the SAF in February 2024, when the SAF made gains in Omdurman, a city across the Nile from Khartoum that forms part of Sudan's wider capital. Since April, intense fighting has focused on three regions: North Darfur, where more than 40 villages have been burned and civilians trapped with no safety or food; in El Fasher, in Kordofan in central Sudan, which the RSF now largely controls, and around Khartoum and along the Blue and White Niles, where the RSF also appears to have the upper hand. In June, the RSF also made gains in Sennar State. By early July, the RSF had the upper hand in Darfur and Khartoum, with the SAF operating from Port Sudan on the Red Sea coast and seeking to challenge the RSF in its strongholds. By September, the SAF had made notable gains in Khartoum and Khartoum North. In September and early October, the SAF, which enjoys air superiority, began a bombing campaign targeting towns controlled by the RSF preparatory to ground assaults. As of the 10th of November, the main focus of this campaign remained the Sudanese capital, Khartoum. The fighting intensified in late November and early December in North Darfur and Khartoum Omdurman. On the 9th of December, there was an air attack on a busy market in Kabkabia, a town about 180 kilometers west of North Darfur's capital, El Fasher. Kabkabia is currently surrounded by the RSF. The airstrike killed more than 100 people and wounded hundreds, including women and children. The SAF insisted that it had the right to target any location used by the RSF for military purposes. On the 10th of December, the RSF aimed heavy artillery fire at an SAF-controlled sector of Omdurman. At least 65 people were killed and hundreds wounded. By the 10th of January, the SAF had the RSF under pressure in several areas. The SAF was poised to capture Wad Madani, capital of El Jazeera State, and the RSF garrison there faced encirclement. Were the SAF able to regain full control of El Jazeera State, it would be pivotal in its attempts to choke the RSF's supply lines to Khartoum, which the RSF still controls. Humanitarian situation. As to the humanitarian situation, on the 2nd of May, 2024, a U.S. Senate hearing estimated that the death toll in this civil war could be as high as 150,000. According to a November report by researchers in Britain and Sudan, more than 61,000 people died in Khartoum State alone during the first 14 months of the war, i.e., before the current SAF campaign in Khartoum began. The new evidence suggests the toll from the devastating conflict is significantly higher than previously recorded. The estimate includes some 26,000 people who suffered violent deaths, a higher figure than one currently used by the United Nations for the entire country. As of the 5th of July, 2024, some 7.7 million people had been internally displaced, more than 2.1 million had fled the country as refugees, and perhaps up to 25 million, half the population, were facing starvation. The UN World Food Programme considers this to be the world's largest hunger crisis. More than half the population is experiencing crisis levels of hunger. Multiple areas are at risk of famine, and on the 1st of August famine was confirmed in a camp sheltering hundreds of thousands of displaced people in North Darfur. On the 7th of January, 2025, the United States formally declared that the RSF had committed genocide during the civil war, particularly in West Darfur, citing a pattern of systematic ethnic violence in which the RSF has killed civilians as they tried to flee and blocked access to essential supplies. Much of this ethnic violence has targeted the non-Arab Masilit and other ethnic groups. In announcing the determination, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken imposed sanctions on the RSF commander, Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, aka Hemedti, and other parties that have been providing the RSF with war material. South Korea. By the 28th of December, South Korean politics was in turmoil. The parliament is controlled by the opposition, which impeached President Yoon Suk-yeol on the 14th of December in response to his brief declaration of martial law in early December. On the 27th of December, it impeached the acting president, Prime Minister Han Duck-soo. The Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister, Choi Sang-mok, is now South Korea's interim leader. Since taking power on the 27th of December, Mr. Choi has ordered the military to boost its readiness to thwart potential North Korean aggression, and has moved to reassure key partners like the United States and Japan that South Korea's security and foreign policies remain unchanged. South Pacific. Vanuatu. On the 17th of December, a magnitude 7.3 earthquake occurred in Vanuatu at 12:47 p.m. Its epicenter was 31 kilometers from the capital, Port Vila. It set off landslides and toppled concrete buildings in the capital, trapping many beneath the rubble. As of the 18th of December, Vanuatu officials put the death toll from the earthquake at 12, with over 210 injured. Australia immediately commenced providing disaster relief and humanitarian assistance. The RAAF conducted several relief flights, transporting Australian natural disaster teams including doctors, paramedics, engineers and communication technicians, equipment, materials, humanitarian supplies and other aid to Port Vila, and returning to Brisbane with Australian tourists and other expatriates seeking evacuation. By the 21st of December, the RAAF had delivered humanitarian supplies sufficient to meet the needs of 500 households and had evacuated 424 Australians. By the 22nd of December, Vanuatu's volunteer pro-rescue team, aided by Vanuatu's paramilitary force and other volunteers, had rescued 7 survivors from the rubble. Repeated cyclones and other natural disasters in recent years, coupled with this earthquake, are challenging Vanuatu's resilience and post-disaster reconstruction capabilities, which are being stretched very thinly. Solomon Islands. On the 20th of December, the Prime Ministers of Australia and the Solomon Islands announced that Australia will invest $190 million in the Royal Solomon Islands Police Force and set up a new police training centre in the Solomons' capital, Honiara. This is part of a new security agreement between the two nations, which Australia hopes will obviate any need for expansion of China's current security presence in the Solomons. It will provide the Solomons with an enduring sovereign security capability and should reduce its reliance on external partners over time. Tonga. On the 24th of December, Tonga's parliament elected a new Prime Minister, former Finance Minister Dr. Isaac Eke. He replaces former Prime Minister, Siasi Sovalini, who resigned in November when faced with a motion of no confidence. Organised crime. Australian bikie gangs are establishing chapters in Pacific countries and are partnering with global criminal groups like the Sinaloa Cartel, Mexico, and the Calabrian Mafia. Their target is the lucrative Australian market for cocaine. The bikies are also setting up legitimate businesses in Fiji and Tonga as cover for greater flow of drugs from the Americas to Australia. South Asia. On the 20th of December, ABC News reported that relations between India and Bangladesh are at a low ebb stoked by politico-religious tensions. For decades, Muslim-majority Bangladesh and Hindu-majority India enjoyed close ties. But earlier this year, the relationship began to fray. What started as peaceful student protests against civil service job quotas morphed into a nationwide movement to force out Bangladesh's authoritarian Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. The protests, which have been described as the world's first Gen Z revolution, resulted in her fleeing by helicopter on the 5th of August, 2024, and into exile in Delhi. In the following months, the arrest of a revered Hindu leader in Bangladesh and a mob attack on a consulate in India have fueled anger between the two countries. Now, the relationship between these South Asian giants is at a low ebb, and religious tensions are high.
This strategic update was produced by David Leese, Chair of the RUSI New South Wales Special Interest Group on Strategy. The SIG Strategy Group seeks to enhance knowledge of strategy, including the evolution of strategic thought, maintain awareness of current geostrategic issues, and undertake research on nominated issues of current strategic interest.